3, 2, 1. 20 years ago today, deja vu happened. The New York Yankees were down to their last out in a World Series game against the Arizona Diamondbacks. For Game 4, Bung-Young Kim gave up a home run to Tino Martinez, and then Derek Jeter was the walk-off hero in extra innings. For Game 5, it was Scott Brocious who tied the game, and Alfonso Soriano had a single that brought in a run in extra innings. So the Yankees had a 3-2 lead, and it could have been a back-breaking series of losses to the Arizona Diamondbacks, but they were able to come back Game 6, Game 7, get those wins and the World Series. Todd Walsh of then Fox Sports Arizona, now Bally Sports Arizona, joins us to talk about the atmosphere in New York and what those losses did to the team and how they bounced back from it. I think it's important to recognize the context of what's going on off the field at this time, 6 weeks removed from September 11th. We're talking about Game 5, but just for you, before that, getting to New York, what was that like for you? What was that like for the team to go to New York, just a couple miles away from ground zero and a couple of weeks removed from those attacks?
It's something that I'll have in my mind as long as I live. Any conversation that I have about that World Series and that week in New York, for me, always starts on the off day before Game 3, because the teams worked out at the stadium. We obviously went there to cover it. I have a few pictures of that night. I don't have a lot of pictures, believe it or not, but I have some from that night. But what I remember so clearly is that they were staging and practicing Marine One and its arrival with the president before Game 3. And there was an alternate and a decoy route. And when Marine One rolls over and hovers over Yankee Stadium, it makes its presence felt, if that makes sense. I remember looking at that and realizing, oh yeah, this is a big deal. And then behind me, they were installing bulletproof glass and lead around the box seat where the president was going to sit. Those are things that just changed the whole tone and tenor of what we were about to experience. I also clearly remember the heightened security at the stadium. I mean, we were told to get there hours early for Game 3 because of the screening. And I laugh now, but I remember winding my way through the media entrance and finally getting to the screeners. And I mean, I'm on television, I wear makeup, and I had a makeup bag. And that was a problem for the guy that I was trying to make my way past. And he just kept looking at me, and they were looking at the powder. And the other thing I clearly remember, I didn't go with the Diamondbacks to ground zero, but the Coyotes were on an Eastern Seaboard trip. And on the day of Game 3, they asked me to leave the Diamondbacks traveling party in the morning and meet them on a street in Manhattan on the team bus, because they were going to ground zero and they wanted to document it. So I literally was standing on a street corner in Manhattan. The Coyote team bus rolls up, I walk on, and we go to ground zero. And we shot a documentary for it. And the other thing that I just can't get out of my mind is that when we went literally into the rubble of the World Trade Center, then we went and looked at it from the top. We went to the command and control center. But when the steam shovel would hit the rubble, flames were still shooting out. It was still smoldering. And that image of the smoldering flames is what I took in my head when I made my way from ground zero to Yankee Stadium for Game 3. And I know I felt it, but I know there was a palpable sense of anxiety and fear in that building. And I remember talking to some members of the media, like, hey, if there was a target right now, this is it. We're in it, Yankee Stadium. And the story has been told 1,000 times, but when George Bush, the president, walks out and throws out the first pitch, he looks up and sees the snipers on the top of the building. There's an extra umpire on the field that Luis Gonzalez noticed that wasn't an umpire and he was armed. I mean, all those things were leading to the start of Game 3. And then as Game 3 began, after the first pitch, it began to change. And what changed was there was a return to normalcy for New Yorkers. And you could just feel it. it went from anxiety, and I think there was fear, to, hey, this is the Yankees, this is the World Series, and they're down 2 games, and nobody beats the Yankees in the World. And you just feel the swagger coming back. And that happened in game 3, 4, and 5. And it was like an escalator. And I've always thought that that was the real gift for New Yorkers, and for, I think, in some aspects, Americans who are watching and living vicariously through a World Series, which really kind of put us back on track, if only for a moment or two, of a communal experience. And I'm fortunate enough, I covered, I think, one of the greatest World Series ever.
Mm-hmm.
But on top of that was this. And I look back on it sometimes, I just shake my head. So that's my long-winded answer to the start of those 3 games in New York.
Yeah, no, I mean, but there's so much that goes into that. And even now, trying to transition to what happened on the field almost seems like it should be in the, not the back seat, but the third row of seats, So with that, here's an awkward transition into what's going on the field. But, after that game 4, where, just a gut punch for the Diamondbacks, 1 out away, what did you sense was the general feeling of the club having to come back from that, a game after midnight, and then coming back the next day and trying to, retake that lead in the World Series?
It was it was almost a TKO, but it wasn't. I remember going into the room. The strange thing from a media perspective, to get into the clubhouse, not the media press conference rooms, but if you're going to go into the clubhouses, you had to go down in like the 7th inning and go through the security process and wait in these long lines in this ancient stadium. So I never saw Tino's hit. I never saw Tino Martinez or Derek Jeter. I never saw it. I felt it. The building shook. And then it was just an explosion of sound and people running around getting into their positions. But so in the aftermath of game 4, I remember walking into the room, and this was a team that was so confident and so battle tested, but this was pushing the limits of that. Their closer, who had been just filthy all year, I mean, you know what happened. And, I don't feel like I don't remember feeling like, I just remember thinking, we're in one now. We're going to be in one, watching this develop. And again, though, it goes back to what I was saying about the swagger. I think the swagger of the New Yorkers and New York fans was sort of transferred to the Yankees. Now they're back in the series. It's 2-2. But I've always thought that the Diamondbacks they felt like they were the better team. They had that confidence about them. And they had so many veterans who've been down before. So I wasn't as concerned after game 4. I was excited because I knew this one might come. I mean, you just had this feeling it was going to come down to the last pitch. And obviously it did.
Yeah, it did quite a few times in that series.
Yes, it did. Yeah.
We always talk about so much, and deservedly so, about Johnson and Schilling in that series. But for game 5, Miguel Batista comes in and throws 7 2/3 scoreless. But what happens after all that kind of gets washed away? What can you just say about his performance coming in with his back against the wall and what he was able to do?
Did he give up a run in the series at all? I don't think he did.
I don't think he did.
He came in game 7. That's also forgotten. I mean, we did a show on Valley Sports where are they now? And I remember looking up his stats, and then I realized it's lost in the spectacle of Randy Johnson coming in game 7. Miguel Batista was lights out. Brian Anderson's performance, and it was at game 3, I think. But and I actually did a little research for our conversation today. I called Mark Race, my partner. I said, hey, remind me how you endured games 3, 4, and 5. And then we started talking about the current World Series, and we're not fans of bullpen games. I mean, I don't want to sound like Clint Eastwood and say get off my lawn, but he just said, I just remember our rotation, and we trotted out Miguel Batista, and he pitched his you-know-what off, and Brian Anderson went out and pitched his you-know-what off. And it's sad to me that those performances get lost in it because of the unbelievable performances of Curt Schilling and Randy Johnson and the drama of Byung-Hyun Kim. I mean, that team was just so complete that it's sad to me that in hindsight, people don't refer to that team as one of the best of this generation, because I'd put him up against anybody. I don't know about you.
Yeah, absolutely. So deja vu essentially happens. Yankees down to their last out, 2-run home run from Scott Brocious. I was actually rewatching it just before we sat down, and Joe Buck, before that pitch comes in, he mentions, "Oh, the Yankees are 1 for 24 in runners in scoring position at that time." And then the crack of the bat, tie game. Yeah. They eventually win it. There are so many teams where one loss like that could break their back and ruin their World Series. What was it about the Diamondbacks that they could endure 2 of those and still be able to take away the series eventually?
I've asked Mark Grace. I mean, we have a running dialogue during games, and we sit and watch before the post-game show. And I asked him that today, about an hour ago, and I've asked him that 100 times. And it just goes back to a little bit of what I was saying. I think they just had a belief. They felt like they were the team of destiny. They felt like they were the team that was supposed to win. They feel, you talk to those guys today, they outplayed the Yankees in 7 games. I mean, when you consider what happened to Young Kim twice, the series doesn't go 7 games. It's over. It's just hey, the Diamondbacks steamrolled the Yankees. And I do want to say this about that team, and recognizing one thing. They understood the gravity of the moment, and they understood the enormity of that this was bigger than a game. And they respected it, and they went to ground zero, and they held that close to their hearts and spoke that way. But they were single-minded and focused. They were here and there to win those games and win the World Series, with all due respect. And they knew that a lot of people had adopted the Yankees because of the drama and of what happened on 9/11. But there are also a lot of people that weren't rooting for the Yankees and were rooting for the Diamondbacks. But they understood all of that. And I thought they just lived it the right way, because it was such a human thing. We were all so touched by it. But then when that first pitch was thrown in every single one of those games, it was time to play baseball and time to beat the Yankees. Mm-hmm. And I have it's not a throwaway line, because I believe it so clearly and dearly. I think both teams got what they needed. The Diamondbacks got what they wanted. The Yankees, like I said before, it was a communal experience for the city of New York and New Yorkers to gather at Yankee Stadium and cheer for their team and watch and cheer if they couldn't get in the building. A communal experience that was taken from them. They absolutely needed to have that. They had it. The Diamondbacks got what they wanted, which was to win. I can't imagine a parade in the Canyon of Heroes in November of 2001. So I always felt like the Yankees had 3 games of unbelievable drama, tension, all of those things, and they won, and their heroes were their heroes, but the Diamondbacks were the better team, and they endured and won 4. That's how I've always looked at it, and nothing will ever take me off that stance. Just living, I had the best seat in the house for it. So if that makes sense.
So you're leaving that best seat in the house. You're walking out of the stadium after game 5, getting ready to fly back to Arizona for elimination games. What are you thinking about this series? Where do you think this is going? As you're getting back to Phoenix.
I felt like there was going to be a game 7, and I felt like this was going to be pure epic baseball. I asked Mark, what was the flight like? I was on the charter, I think, all the whole season. It was my first year at what was Fox Sports Arizona. I parachuted in on the 2001 Diamondbacks. I believe I was on the charter. I was on the charter all season. I think I was on the charter even in the NLDS and NLCS, and then we were taken off. We had our own broadcast charter. So I asked Mark Grace today, what was that charter flight like back? He said it was exact same as any other flight. Guys were playing cards. There was music. There was a lot of chirping going on. But we have Kurt Schilling and we have Brandy Johnson. We're going to be fine. And that's kind of how I looked at it too. Like, how many times had I seen this team throw those guys out back to back in the series? I also know that this was a team that didn't run away. You remember with the National League West, they won it by 2 games. It took them to the 160th game to win that night in Milwaukee with Albie Lopez. They barely beat the St. Louis Cardinals, and then they found their groove with the Braves. So they had been through that thing. It was a succession of getting to this point. So I just remember thinking, this is going to be unbelievable. Like, here it is. It's going to come down to Randy Johnson and Kurt Schilling. And I'm sure you've talked about it over the years, but the story of how Bob Brenly lined up his pitchers, he had time to do it because they rolled over the Braves, and he wanted Kurt to start the series. And I think that's such a big part of the whole thing, because Randy matched Kurt. I don't know if the other would have happened if it was flipped. And that was the gamble that Bob made. And just so many little things that went into this thing that should never be forgotten if you're a true blue Diamondbacks fan.
Absolutely. Todd, thanks so much for the time and the insight. It was fun and very insightful, taking a trip down memory lane to Game 5.
Oh, no, thanks for taking me there. I was watching the game last night, and I can't help but drift there sometimes and say, man, you'll never come close to it. So thanks for sharing and letting me share. I appreciate that.